Aircraft carriers are the most powerful weapons in modern naval warfare. The might of the carrier is in its air wing. Video Ordnance examines the modern supercarrier and its remarkable variety of aircraft. The advent of the aircraft carrier marked a revolution in naval warfare. Carriers became the dominant surface warships in World War II, replacing the battleship. The battleship's power came from its heavy guns, which could hit other ships nearly 30 miles away. A carrier's power came from its airplanes. World War II carrier aircraft could hit targets 200 miles away. Modern carriers can strike targets 1,000 miles away. Today, there are two principal types of aircraft carriers: light small-deck carriers and large full-deck supercarriers. Light carriers, like those used by Britain and the Soviet Union, have small decks. They can operate only about 24 helicopters or vertical takeoff jets. Their specialty is anti-submarine warfare. The United States Navy is the only force operating supercarriers. Supercarriers are the largest surface warships afloat today. They have an air wing of about 100 aircraft, about 4 times the size of the air wing on a light carrier. Our special focus in this program will be the supercarriers. The supercarrier is a floating city. Turned on its side, it's as large as an 80-story skyscraper. It displaces 80,000 tons. The flat top is a seagoing airport with a crew of 5,000 men. About half the crew operates the ship itself, while the others take care of the aircraft. Supercarriers are the most expensive weapons in today's arsenals. A typical carrier costs about $3.5 billion, not even counting her aircraft. Control of the ship is managed from the island, located on the right side of the vessel. The large flight deck is 4 acres in size. A supercarrier can launch up to 3 aircraft at one time. Below the flight deck is a large hangar deck where aircraft are stored and repaired. Below the hangar deck are the living quarters for most of the crew and the ship's propulsion. Supercarriers can be either conventionally powered or nuclear powered. Nuclear powered carriers can operate for about 10 years without refueling. Modern carriers have surprisingly few weapons aside from their aircraft. Their armament is usually limited to a few Sea Sparrow missile launchers and several 20mm phalanx Gatling guns for last-ditch defense against anti-ship missiles. A carrier depends on her aircraft for defense. A supercarrier holds as much firepower as all that available to the United States Navy in World War II. Much of this firepower comes from the nuclear weapons on board. But even without nuclear weapons, the firepower of a carrier is awesome. A typical carrier has about 24 A-6 Intruder attack bombers. These 2-man bombers can carry as many bombs as the largest heavy bombers of World War II. The Intruders are the offensive power of the carrier. The F-14 Tomcats are its defensive shield. Carriers are popularly called bird farms in the Navy due to their flock of airplanes. Carriers extend the military power of a country to distant lands. When Britain recaptured the Falkland Islands, it was carriers that protected the invasion fleet and attacked Argentinian army positions. They are the big stick of foreign policy. Carriers do not operate in isolation, but as part of a carrier battle group. A carrier battle group includes other types of warships, such as destroyers, which provide defense against hostile submarines and air cover against anti-ship missiles. A carrier's strength extends from its air wings. Unlike other warships, carriers possess very few guns or missiles to fight other ships or to defend themselves against attack. The most powerful carriers are the large-deck supercarriers of the United States Navy. They can operate high-performance aircraft since they're large enough for catapult launchers. A supercarrier operates 6 or 7 different types of aircraft. Each has its own specific role in carrier operations, such as air defense, attack, early warning, submarine hunting, or rescue. These aircraft form 7 to 9 squadrons, numbering about 100 aircraft. Small deck carriers are not as versatile. They're too small for catapults and cannot carry the large, high-performance aircraft. Instead, they depend on vertical takeoff aircraft like helicopters and jump jets. A supercarrier usually has at least 2 fighter squadrons. The fighter planes defend the carrier from enemy aircraft. They can escort the carrier's attack planes on missions to defend them from hostile fighters. The United States Navy currently operates 2 types of fighter aircraft. The F-14 Tomcat is a long-range interceptor capable of carrying out air patrols hundreds of miles from the carrier. It is the most powerful carrier fighter in the world today, with missiles that can attack enemy planes over 75 miles away. Its smaller cousin is the F-18 Hornet strike fighter. The hallmark of the F-18 Hornet is its versatility. It can be used as a fighter armed with guns and missiles, or as a light attack aircraft armed with bombs. The French Navy uses the Super Étendard as a fighter and strike aircraft. On small deck carriers, jump jets are used as both fighters and light bombers. The premier vertical takeoff fighter is the Harrier. The Soviet Navy uses a similar vertical takeoff fighter, the Yak-38 Forger, on its small deck carriers. These little jump jets do not have the payload or range of fighters like the Hornet or the Tomcat, but the Harrier proved its mettle during the Falklands War. The carrier's long-range punch comes from its attack aircraft. On American supercarriers, there are usually light and medium attack planes. The A-7 Corsair remains one of the principal light attack aircraft in the United States Navy. It is gradually being replaced by the more modern F-18 Hornet strike fighter. The heavy firepower comes from the Grumman A-6 Intruder. The Intruder is an all-weather bomber. It can operate day or night and in the poorest weather conditions. Small deck carriers cannot carry the specialized attack aircraft and use their vertical takeoff fighters like the Harrier instead. By way of comparison, the Harrier strike fighter can carry 2 tons of bombs, the F-18 Hornet 4 tons of bombs, and the A-6 Intruder 7 tons. On a bombing mission, attack aircraft are supported by EA-6B Prowler electronic warfare aircraft. The Prowler is based on the same airframe as the A-6 Intruder, but has a 4-man crew instead of the Intruder's 2. The Prowler carries no bombs. Its weapons are powerful electronic jamming pods carried under each wing. It accompanies the Intruders on attack missions. Its sensitive electronics hunt out enemy radars. The pods under the wing send out strong signals which electronically blind enemy radars. One of the most unusual aircraft aboard carriers is the Grumman E-2C Hawkeye. The Hawkeye is a long-range radar surveillance aircraft. The large flying saucer dome above the aircraft contains a powerful search radar that rotates as the aircraft flies. Its radar looks out 300 miles in all directions. The Hawkeye can detect aircraft and missiles in a 3 million cubic mile area. The Hawkeye warns the carrier about the approach of hostile aircraft and ships. It can also be used as an airborne command center to coordinate the carrier's fighter planes. The task of protecting the carrier from enemy submarines falls on a squadron of helicopters and a squadron of long-range patrol planes. Helicopters, like the Sikorsky SH-3 Sea King, can search for enemy submarines using a dipping sonar. They provide close-range anti-submarine protection for the carrier. Helicopters are also used to rescue pilots if their planes crash at sea. For long-range missions, the Lockheed S-3 Viking is launched. The Viking can hunt submarines hundreds of miles from the carrier and patrol 6 or 7 hours before returning. It can attack submarines and ships with torpedoes or harpoon anti-ship missiles. What separates carrier pilots from other military aviators is the skill required to operate from the small flight deck. The carrier is so short that a steam catapult is used to fire the aircraft off the carrier deck. There are usually 4 catapults on each carrier. The front landing gear of the aircraft is locked into a device called a shuttle. When the catapult is fired, enormous steam pressure is released. This yanks the shuttle and the aircraft across the deck at over 100 miles an hour. A Navy aviator describes the experience.
Oh, it's a blast. It's a kick. You're sitting in there and you're getting all set. You know, your heart's going a mile a minute. And the pilot's looking for certain signals from the deck crew that everything's all set up, that the nose gear's all hooked up and everything. And when the pilot's all set to go, he gives the deck crew a smart salute, and he puts his head back, and you wait 1 or 2 seconds till the catapult officer presses the button. And then it's just a kick, you know, it's just a big kick. Tremendous acceleration from 0 to upwards of 120, 130 miles an hour knots in 2 seconds. And then as soon as you get off the boat, it's like everything stops because you don't have the acceleration anymore. You just have the speed. And it's sort of like you're floating. You know, you got to look at your instruments, make sure you're flying. Oh, yeah, okay, I'm flying. And then it's a blast. It's a real good time.
The tasks of the deck crew may not be as glamorous as the pilots, but they're every bit as vital. Because of the noise of the jet engines, deck crews coordinate their actions by visual means. A pilot can tell the function of the deck crew by the color of their uniform.
It's very hard to communicate. It's so loud, so a lot is done by sight. And you can tell who people are by the colors of them. And examples are the people who wear purple are the fuel. They deal with refueling all the aircraft. The people in brown are the plane captains. They assist the crew in pre-flighting the aircraft and help them get all set. The people in yellow are the plane directors. They're the ones who move the aircraft. The aircraft doesn't go anywhere unless the plane captains tell them where to go. The men in green are the arresting gear and the catapult crew. They're the ones who hook the plane up to the catapult, and they're the ones who make sure that the landing gear is all set to go. And the people in white are safety. The landing signal officer at the end of the deck wears white. They're involved in safety. So just by looking at the colors, it's very easy to tell what they do and whether they're supposed to be where they're supposed to be and where you're supposed to be. And it makes it a lot easier on the air crew and makes everything flow smooth.
During catapult launches, the pilots are just along for the ride. It's the carrier landings that demand all the skill. Carrier landings are often described by pilots as controlled crashes. 20 tons of airplane hit the deck at over 100 miles an hour. Landings are what separate carrier aviators from all other pilots.
The landing, on the other hand, is where all the skill's involved. That's where the pilots make their money. That's where unfortunately the accidents happen around the carrier. Daytime landings become fun after a while because they're a real challenge, but the nighttime landings, I don't think there's too many carrier pilots out there that'll tell you that landing at night on the boat is fun. It's scary, it's demanding. You get a pasty taste in your mouth and break out in a cold sweat, and you're just glad to be home when the airplane hits the deck. The big problem is attitude reference. When you land at night, there's no depth perception. There's no sense of high or low. There's none of that seat of the pants kind of feel. You're doing it all on instruments, and that includes flying the meatball. You can't barely see the deck, and so you're just, everything's visual, and your head's trying to screw you up. Your ears are messed up, your sense of balance is fouled up, and you're trying to fight all these bad influences just to get yourself home. So I'd say the landing is obviously the more difficult.
Flying the meatball is naval aviator slang for a system of lights used to guide the pilot onto the deck. There is a yellow bar called the meatball in the center and a row of green datum lights. If the ball is above the green lights, the plane is too high. Below, and it's too low. On the deck are 4 arresting wires. If the pilot flies the ball, his plane should land near the 3rd one, called the 3-wire. The wire is caught by an arresting hook at the rear of the plane. Landing takes tremendous concentration. The carrier's offensive power comes from its attack squadrons. The air wing can carry out missions against land targets or ships 1,000 miles away. At the center of any attack mission is the Grumman A-6 Intruder. Lieutenant James Bass explains its role.
We call ourselves a spearhead of the attack. We're the offensive punch of the air wing. We're a medium attack aircraft to carry a lot of bombs in harm's way. Our job is to be the guys that go across the beach, that do the attack. Most of the other airplanes you see out here on the carrier are out here to support us, the fighters, to protect the carrier. The light attack aircraft do a lot of anti-radiation kind of thing, SAM suppression, we call it. They shoot the anti-radiation missiles, the EA-6Bs. They take care of the electronic countermeasures.
The most deadly enemy of aircraft such as the Intruder is the anti-aircraft missile. Most modern anti-aircraft missiles rely on radar to find the target and to guide the missile against the aircraft. Radar has one particular weakness. It can be blocked by terrain features, so it cannot see aircraft approaching from low altitudes. The Intruder exploits this blind spot by flying very low to the ground.
A-6 is a low-level attack aircraft, so we're low level. We fly at altitudes. We can go as low as 50 feet, as low as the pilot wants, pretty much. It takes a lot of skill to do that, and they're very skilled pilots. We're usually low. We train about 200 feet, 500 feet in that area. Speeds from 360 to 500 knots. So as you can imagine, it takes an incredible amount of concentration. A lot of crew concept. The pilot's flying the plane, which, as I said, takes a lot of concentration. The bombardier navigator is navigating the plane throughout. When you're down that low, you don't have any navigational aids that you can use, so it's strictly using preparation, chart work, visual aids. At night, when you don't have visual aids, the radar.
Flying a jet attack aircraft like the Intruder is more than a single pilot can handle. The other seat in the aircraft is filled by a bombardier navigator.
I'm a bombardier navigator. I fly on the right seat. The pilot, of course, is the left seat. On his side, he has all the normal flight controls of any aircraft, stick and throttle. Any pilot that flies a Cessna 150 would probably be fairly familiar with most of the stuff on his side of the airplane. There's a few boxes in there that he wouldn't understand right off the bat, just to make his job a little easier. The right side of the airplane, the bombardier navigator side, my side, consists of a radar, a computer, an inertial navigation system, and a forward-looking infrared turret display, which looks like a little TV.
The small sensor below the nose of the aircraft is a special thermal imaging sight, which helps the aircraft fly at night.
We can see the difference between buildings, people, convoys, trucks, ships. any of that. And that's what makes us able to bomb so accurately at night, which gives us the element of surprise and things such as that. What allows us another aspect that the A6 has that gives us great capability is what they call SRTC. It's terrain clearance. It allows us, it takes whatever the radar's looking at and gives a three-dimensional view on the pilot side. So we can fly in and around mountains, and I can see that on the radar, and the pilot can see it on his three-dimensional presentation. And so we're both navigating through the mountains. We're both cross-checking. I don't accidentally fly us into a mountain because he can see it right there, and vice versa. And so with those two capabilities, it gives us a tremendous advantage, element of surprise. We can fly at night in any weather.
To help baffle enemy radars and missiles, a strike force is accompanied by the EA-6B Prowler. The Prowler locates enemy radars with its sensitive electronics. Once identified, it can jam the radar by using strong electronic signals. An ordinary radar scope looks like this. The small green blips show the location of incoming aircraft. But when jammed with electronic noise from the Prowler, the screen becomes cluttered and unreadable. To permanently eliminate the radar, an F-18 Hornet can carry special anti-radiation missiles that home in on the radar beams. Enemy aircraft can also pose a threat to an attack mission. To protect against enemy fighters, F-18 Hornets escort the bombers to the target. It is equally adept at dogfighting and ground attack. With the mission over, the planes return to the carrier. On long-range missions, it's often necessary for the aircraft to refuel. The carrier has its own refueling aircraft, based on a modified version of the Intruder called the KA-6 tanker. The KA-6 spools out a fuel line behind it. Each of the carrier aircraft have a special refueling boom on the nose of the aircraft. The aircraft carefully position each other, catching the drogue from the refueling line on the nose probe. Precision flying is an essential skill of the carrier aviator. Since the Battle of Midway in 1943, naval aircraft have proven to be the most deadly opponent of surface warships. The carrier's primary defense against enemy aircraft is the jet fighter. The design of carrier fighters is determined by the type of aircraft likely to threaten the carrier. The F-14 Tomcat was designed to protect the carrier against long-range patrol bombers firing cruise missiles, like the Soviet Tu-95 Bear bomber. The cruise missiles fired by the Bear are as large as a fighter plane and are designed specifically to attack carriers. These missiles contain a ton of high explosive and can be launched over 100 miles from the carrier. The F-14 Tomcat was designed to protect the carrier from this type of weapon. The carrier's radar can search the skies for enemy bombers, but the radar emits radiation that can help an enemy locate the carrier. So in wartime, the radar would often be silent. Instead, the E-2C Hawkeye would be sent aloft to hunt for enemy aircraft. Once the Hawkeye had located the enemy bombers, the F-14 Tomcat would be sent into action. Modern naval air combat bears little resemblance to the dogfights of World War II. It is a popular misconception that the Tomcat was designed primarily for close-range dogfights. In most engagements, the Tomcat crew is unlikely to see its opponent. Its powerful radar can locate bombers over 200 miles away. It's designed to destroy the bomber with a long-range Phoenix missile before the bomber can attack the carrier. The most remarkable feature of the Tomcat is that it can locate and attack 6 targets almost simultaneously. The Tomcat is also an effective dogfighter. It is armed with a Gatling gun and short-range missiles to challenge small, maneuverable enemy fighters. Tomcat pilots are regularly trained in aggressive dogfighting maneuvers. The Tomcat's smaller cousin is the F-18 Hornet. The Hornet was developed to bridge the gap between the specialized Tomcat fighter and the intruder bomber. The Hornet can be used either as a fighter to support the Tomcat or as a light bomber to support the intruder. The F-18 Hornet is well designed for the traditional dogfighting role. It is smaller and more agile than the Tomcat, even though it does not have the Tomcat's range or firepower. The Hornet is armed with a gun for dogfighting and strafing and with the Sparrow and Sidewinder missiles. Supercarriers have changed little over the past 2 decades, despite modest improvements in their electronics. Where change has come is not in the ship itself, but in its aircraft. Critics have charged that in an age of anti-ship missiles, supercarriers are too big and too vulnerable. But for the foreseeable future, there is no other ship with such an awesome combination of offensive striking power and defensive self-protection.